The Steam Deck's been out for over a year at this point, and I know for a fact that most of my viewers are in fact Steam Deck owners, but I think it's time to talk about the competition. Some would argue that the Steam Deck has no true competitor because nothing even comes close to it, and I'll address these claims later in the video. But for now, it's time to see who's gunning for second place. If this were a race that I had my money on, I would put my money on the ROG Ally easily. This is ASUS's first foray into the PC handheld space, and they came out swinging hard. Of all of the Steam Deck competitors, I think this is going to be second place simply due to the fact that this is a brand that people know in the West. They have repair centers in the West, whereas with a GPD device or an Aya Neo device, your device has to go all the way to China and get repaired in China, which could take months. What also gives the ROG Ally the edge is that this is supposed to be a device that's going to be on shelves. Not even the Steam Deck itself is on shelves. What do we know about the specs? We have a leak right here from Geekbench. This is showcasing the Ryzen Z1 Extreme APU, an 8-core 16-thread monster. Do keep in mind that synthetic bench scores don't necessarily translate to the real world. This seems to be significantly more powerful than the Steam Deck, and as we know from Linus Tech Tips and Dave 2D, the ROG Ally is supposed to be 50% more performant than the Steam Deck at the same wattage. The Ally screen is supposed to be a 1080p native resolution screen with 120Hz refresh rate. See, the sort of games I play portably don't necessarily need all the highest refresh rates, but it is nice to have for those of you that want to run games at 120 FPS portably, you know, like Apex Legends or something. But I have my concerns about running games at 1080p at 120Hz. I have my concerns with games actually running as well as the battery life. The biggest issue in my opinion comes from the fact that there could be multiple different ROG Allies with multiple different specs, different APUs. The Fox certainly believes there might be different SKUs. I think stratifying performance levels at different tiers is a mistake. I think part of the reason for the Steam Deck's success is that all Steam Decks performed identically, the only major difference being how much storage comes with your Steam Deck. Now for the next competitor on hand, the GPD Win Mini. The GPD Win Mini promises to return to a smaller form factor similar to the GPD Win 2. A pocketable handheld that looks very similar to a 3DS. The Fox has revealed specs for a GPD Win Mini, and the specs are as follows. Be sure to pause right here so you can see the specs in detail. So much like the ROG Ally, this features a 1080p panel running at 120Hz, which, like I said, is very nice, but I don't think it's totally necessary for a handheld. And I would like to see its effect on battery life, so we'll have to look at that later. Unlike the ROG Ally though, we know the exact processors that we're using. We've got right here the AMD Ryzen 7 7840U and the Ryzen 5 7440U. If the ROG Ally speculation is true, then the Ryzen Z1 and Z1 Extremes are just customized versions of these specific APUs. If that's the case, then you can expect very similar performance to the ROG Ally. What I am interested in is something called Oculink. What is Oculink, you might ask? Well, it's a competitor for Thunderbolt, featuring cabled PCI Express connectivity. One obvious use case would be an Oculink eGPU. It's supposedly better than Thunderbolt, but truth be told, I've never used an Oculink device before. And if that isn't enough for you, it also has Thunderbolt 4. It's also slated to have a 45 watt-hour battery. Compare that to the Steam Deck's 40 watt-hour battery. But as you know, battery life is not just the battery capacity, but also what the software does. And yes, the GPD Win Mini has gyro. I don't even know if the ROG Ally has gyro or not. If the GPD Win Mini returns to the GPD Win 2 form factor, I could literally put it in my pocket. That alone would make it a worthy consideration. Now we move on to our next Steam Deck competitor, the Aya Neo Next 2. The big hallmark feature of the Aya Neo Next 2 is the fact that it's supposed to have a dedicated GPU inside of it, which is unheard of for these types of devices. That statement alone raises several questions about how this would actually work on a handheld, such as how hot the handheld would get, how well would games perform, and how many minutes of battery life you'd have. Based on my own guesstimations, I don't think this would really be a practical device to play outside of your house. But I could be wrong, I could be pleasantly surprised. Maybe Aya Neo unlocked the secret sauce, being able to use a dedicated GPU without destroying your battery life. On the topic of Aya though, it seems that there's a rumored Aya Neo 2S coming out soon. Supposedly the big change is the APU. instead shipping with a Ryzen 7 8740U instead of the 6800U. Other than that though, it's not a significant evolutionary change. There's also the Aoki Zoe A1 Pro. This is expected to be very similar to the Aoki Zoe A1, except, you know, faster because there's newer APU. There's also the Aoki Zoe 2, which in theory should have very similar specs, but with a fairly different form factor. We don't really know that much about this device though, so we'll keep you updated. But there is one handheld that we were looking forward to, but not anymore. That being the Loki. The Loki was announced last year, and if it were to come out this year, it would be severely outdated compared to anything that comes out this year. It's gotten to the point where the Fox himself canceled his Loki order, and that says a lot about the state of the Loki, honestly. So there we have it, folks. There's our Steam Deck competition for 2023. But you may be asking yourself, how is any of this competition? Does the Steam Deck even really have competition? Well, of course the Steam Deck has competition. People are looking to these as Steam Deck alternatives, especially if they can't buy a Steam Deck in their own native regions. There are also those who are attracted to the appeal of the Steam Deck, but just a more powerful version of a Steam Deck. And finally, there are also those that want a smaller version of a Steam Deck, a device that's smaller, potentially even more premium than the Steam Deck. Admittedly, this one is much harder to gauge since I don't have any of these devices on my own hands, but I do want to review some of these devices in the future. Maybe not all of them, but definitely some of them. Definitely the ROG Ally. There's also the fact that the Steam Deck just has more control options. The Steam Deck has trackpads, 4 back buttons in the back. Of all these competitors, literally one has trackpads. The Aya Neo next to, and the trackpads are so far down that I'm not sure if they'll even really be that useful or that ergonomically viable. The Steam Deck has gyro, and yes, I'm aware most of the competitors have gyro, but I don't know if the ROG Ally has gyro. I would imagine it having gyro, but who knows. And finally, let's talk about the operating system. Literally every single one of these competitors runs Windows. Why does this matter really? Well, it's simple really. The Steam Deck doesn't run Windows. While you can definitely install Windows on the Steam Deck, the Steam Deck's default experience is that of SteamOS, a customized version of Linux for the Steam Deck. It's this different operating system that gives the Steam Deck a much different feel from your typical PC. The entire experience feels so cohesive due to the fact that Valve maintains, operates, and updates this OS. You may have heard people say that Windows on a handheld is a complete disaster due to the fact that, you know, the Windows experience isn't designed for handhelds in mind, much less a game controller period. That's why every Steam Deck competitor is trying to create their own software to make sure all of this stuff is cohesive. If I do end up reviewing any of these products, I will be focusing on talking about their software, because their software is what makes the experience slightly different from just installing Windows, you know? If you liked this video, you should give it a thumbs up and spread the good gospel of high-tech lowlife. And if you want to see more high-tech lowlife, be sure to enable notifications and press the subscribe button. Furthermore, we have a community Discord server for enlightened individuals such as you. And in case you wanted to directly support high-tech lowlife, you can join our Patreon page.